Alrighty, so welcome everyone to the first of a series of videos where we are going to be doing these lovely shorter little promo sessions to display what astrology is, how it works, and walk you through a real live reading so that we can get some fun feedback and education and just kind of explore what astrology is, how a session works, and expose you to the wonderful world that is kind of looking at the stars. So what we'll do is we will share our screen. And this is the chart of our lovely client number one, the first, but definitely not the last in the series. And we've created this chart and cut out all personal information so we can just focus on the stars and the planets and the transits. So welcome, my dear. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
First and foremost, have you ever had a astrology consult before?
Yes, I have.
Excellent. And did you find that it was valuable? Did you find that there were some questions left unanswered? Anything in particular that stood out to you?
I found it was very valuable. I really enjoyed it.
Perfect. Excellent. Any questions on your chart? Anything that you've kind of been dying to know before we go into the spiel of kind of going through the top four and walking you through some of the major placements?
Nothing in particular. I'm just excited to hear what you have to say.
Perfect. Awesome. So in astrology, when it's done well, astrology should tell you nothing new. It should echo back to you the things that you've already discovered in your life, the things that you already know about yourself. There shouldn't be any like, wow, that's crazy revelations of like, I didn't know that, unless of course you've suppressed something rather serious. And then, you know, we can talk about that and unpack those moments of kind of blind spots in the chart, which sometimes we can expose, especially with your Venus placement, which we'll get to throughout the chart. But essentially what I like to do when I start my consults is go through the top four. And a lot of clients are familiar with their sun sign. Lesser clients or few are familiar with the moon sign. And then even fewer are familiar with the ascendant or the rising sign, as well as the chart ruler. So starting there is a really good grasp to understand that the natal chart is exploring the different facets of the self. And although, you know, when we read horoscopes, we're normally just focused on the sun sign, yours being at Cancer, but your sun sign is a really fun 29-degree Cancer. So right on that edge of the sign, and you've got some really cool other placements that help echo that kind of edge placement.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be talking about that and delving into the idea that you're not just your sun sign, but you are this kind of multifaceted being. And each part of the chart kind of needs to be acknowledged, respected, nourished, fed would be a good word, with kind of lifestyle things and personal development and all of those lovely kind of growth aspects.
Okay.
So of course we have Sun in Cancer. Cancer is the sign of the mother. It naturally makes you a little bit more hospitable, a little bit more compassionate, definitely more on the heart-filled, empathetic side. Not only is your sun in Cancer, but it is in the 11th house of friendships and societal group involvement. So we have a lot of that charisma, which can manifest as some of the bleeding heart tendencies of overgiving. Overgiving not just to people in your inner circle, but to people you barely know. I've had a few clients who have a similar placement that are kind of volunteer addicts. They spread themselves too thin, where the butter just is too thinly spread over the toast. Like there's not enough of you to go around for all of the projects and all of the things that you would like to kind of have your hands in the various pots.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at that sun in Cancer, I think it is really interesting because it's at 29 degrees, 34 clicks into the sign. So it's just a couple hours later, you know, and we would have a totally different sign for you for the sun. You really chose that last possible moment to come in for that Cancer placement. And there's a lot of debate in astrology about cusp signs and what they represent and what they mean. But I've found that clients do find value understanding that you're not just a Cancer, you're on the edge of Cancer, you're preparing to make that transition from Cancer to Leo. And I think what what really emphasizes that transition for me in your chart, and why you need to consider not just your watery energy, but also that idea of that heat, that fire, that kind of Leo-ness, that radiance that would come through, not necessarily as strongly in a Cancer, but you've got this moon in Aries very close to your Mars in Aries in the 8th house, that's kind of begging you to be a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more colorful, a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more headstrong, a little bit more passionate, things that Cancer would feel uncomfortable with because of the more subdued, watery nature of the sign. But because you're on that cusp, it's really fascinating to dig into this idea of you not just being a Cancer, but being on the edge of Cancer, ready to burst out of your shell and claim your fire. How does that sound so far?
That sounds absolutely perfect, and it's goes along very strongly with what I'm kind of going through right now, just personally in life. So
excellent. There are a couple challenges with this moon in Aries. The moon changes signs every couple days, so it is one of the faster moving planets. Where it's located does indicate our emotional tendencies, but also how we find emotional fulfillment. And yours being in Aries, which is a fire sign. Moon doesn't really do well in fire signs. Those emotions kind of turn to gasoline, and they can become a little bit volatile. Just one spark and the whole thing just lights up. But not only because of the moon in Aries, but because it is also ruled by Mars and Aries in the same house. Mars is the planet of fire. It is the planet of leadership. It is the planet of action, ask for forgiveness, not for permission type energy. And because Mars is there kind of egging the moon on, there can be struggles with temper, struggles with anger, struggles with kind of needing to hold back, but you can't. And so one of the big questions that I wanted to ask you about your chart is, how have you experienced that, and what have you done to kind of learn through that experience of making sure that your emotional state isn't as kind of wildfiery and out of control?
It's definitely something that I struggle with when I'm just emotionally angry in particular. Like you said, if I'm angry, I absolutely have like a point where I cannot shut my mouth. I just can't keep it in anymore. I guess what I do honestly is I'm just a very physical person. I really like physical activity. So I find that helps me a lot. I've always, for many years, for almost 20 years, I've trained in boxing and martial arts gyms. And for me, that's what kind of moves that energy out, because it's very helpful for me. But otherwise, it's definitely hard for me to contain myself if I'm like physically, and not just if I'm mad, it's very hard to stop from saying what I really feel. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Mars is definitely the planet of aggression. It is the planet of war, and so that energy bleeding in, but also that's actually one of the major things that I'll suggest to clients is finding some sort of constructive, competitive physical outlet like a martial arts, which is structured. It puts boundaries on things. It makes sure that the environment is safe and supervised, but it does allow you to get out that pent up heat, that pent up fire in a way that's constructive and healing, especially because of how kind of inflaming that can be if it's not vented. For sure. Excellent. One of the other things that I find interesting about the Mars moon in Aries in the 8th is the 8th house is the house of entrepreneurship. It's the house of business. It's also the house of fun things like death and taxes and estates and other people's money. But it's a house of investment. And so there's a really strong emotional flavor in your chart of needing to be independent, to do your own thing, to run your own business, to have your own skin in the game, and to make sure that you're playing with kind of the big dogs, to say the least. and especially making sure that you prove yourself. Mars is very big on proving itself to its environment, to its peers, to the world around it. And so how have you noticed that kind of urge or that fire needing to be channeled into something like starting a small business?
I do have a small business actually. I do readings. I do intuitive readings and stuff like that. So I absolutely can see that that's me. And also, I'm also a nanny. I've been a nanny for a long time, which even though I'm working for families, it is completely independent. They don't have anybody. Of course, I have parents giving me information and stuff, but I don't really have like people there to direct me at all. So I've always been like that. Yes.
Yeah. And this kind of bleeds into several other aspects of the chart regarding children, which we'll talk about. So I think that that's going to be super fun as well when we get to that. But I love that. The eighth house also tends to be a very intuitive house because it is the house of death. So when we have major placements here, there are often people who are very gifted in mediumship in this space, specifically communicating with the dead and those who have passed. So that's a really fun expression of the intuitive work. And I think that diving into aspects of spiritualism or working with people who have crossed over would be an excellent outlet, again, for that kind of martial energy.
Okay. I've had other people tell me similar things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Any questions on the sun or the moon thus far?
No, not yet.
Cool. So let's go to the rising. So the rising or the ascendant sign is the sign that was on the horizon at the time of your birth. The way that I like to describe the ascendant is it's the sign whose light touched your body first. And I really love that imagery of like the dawn of your life being associated with a particular sign. In more traditional astrology, the ascendant is very important because it dictates the core personality, but it also dictates the ruler of the chart, which gives you a lot of essential skills and the vantage point from which you see the world, especially because the ruler of your chart is Mercury, the planet of the mind. So we look to your ascendant and we find the sign of Virgo, which is the sign of the manager. It's mutable earth, so nannying, excellent aspect of that, pairing your Cancer sun in the 11th house of friendships with that Virgo gives you a very Mary Poppins type energy, and I adore that. Virgo is that mutable earth. It's about putting things in boxes, managing things. It's a very Marie Kondo type sign where we're making sure that mise en place is maintained, everything in its proper place, and we're making sure that the details are honored because without the to-do list, all things devolve into chaos. And that Virgo energy, I think, is super important to complement a lot of the other aspects that you're working with in your chart. It gives you a nice groundedness. It pairs your water and your fire with some earth, which is always great. But it does remind you that, Mars can be a little bit out of control. Cancer can get a little bit in its feelings. Virgo really takes a step back and is like, you know what, let's bring in the objectivity. Like, let's make sure that we're not too biased in this situation and we're seeing the most efficient and effective way forward. So I like that for you. I think that that's a really great kind of balanced quality to have on the ascendant. How is that manifested in your life?
I'm not 100% sure. I think that I do tend to be pretty logical, even though I'm like very emotional and intuitive. I do sometimes, but I feel like sometimes it's kind of a struggle because I kind of struggle between the two, being either super logical and super like list oriented or super the other way. It's difficult for me to balance the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and let's talk about why that is difficult. Because when we look at the ruler of your chart, we find our first real problematic kind of dynamic in your wheelhouses. So The ruler of the chart is Mercury. Your Mercury is retrograde, which means that it's at the slowest, one of the slowest points of its cycles. But then it's also eclipsed by the sun. So when a planet is within a certain degree point of the sun, visually, we cannot see it in the skies anymore. It's blinded, and it's what we would call combust. And so having the ruler of the chart be combust, especially Mercury, and Mercury being retrograde, it means that the mind is often able to be overtaken, most often by feelings, that kind of Cancer aspect, or by other people. Being influenced by the social dynamic is one of the big weak points that you would have kind of fallen prey to earlier in life, of societal pressures trying to tell you what to do, enforcing their will upon you, almost manipulating the mind, because that Mercury is fragile. It's a little bit it's too in its own funk to really stand up and be like, I am Mercury, Lord of the mind. Let me rationalize the crap out of this and make sense out of the chaos. You know, instead, it's super slow, it's visually going backwards, and it's blind behind the sun. So there is this almost emotional manipulation that can sometimes be a theme in the life when we see that happening, especially in Cancer.
Do you mean that Mercury was retrograde when I was born?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I understand.
Yeah. This can manifest as classic things like constantly saying one thing but meaning another, or people needing you to restate what you're saying in a different way, because for some reason it doesn't come through. It doesn't translate well. But also, again, your mind, your mental state, that Mercury being overshadowed or manipulated by the public, that 11th house topic, or, you know, those who are close to you that have a hold on your heartstrings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I definitely can see that in particular with my self-confidence with things, because I feel like I don't confidently, especially in the past. It's definitely better, but I absolutely can tell that my confidence just can be shaken by other people's opinions or other people's, you know, should do thing ideas.
Yeah. And this is the tricky part about your chart, because on one hand, we have that lunar and martial independence that's just like, screw you guys, let me do it my way. I have to do it my way. But the minute that other people get involved, that Lord of the chart really just, it collapses under the weight of other people's opinions. So making sure that you're isolating appropriately, making sure that you're taking time for you to kind of shake your Etch-a-Sketch and make sure that people aren't drawing on your canvas is really important to your chart.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And also with that transition of the sun from Cancer into Leo, you know, Leo is not just the sign of the lion. Especially in medical astrology, we see Leo as the sign of the heart, the spine, the eyes. It's literally the sign of the backbone, right? So when people have that Cancer Leo cusp sun, or any major placement on that cusp, it's kind of learning to, instead of being that empathizer, to be that leader, that hearth fire, that ability to stand up and shine, as opposed to kind of conforming to the needs of others and being a little bit more watery, or you know, water conforms to the vessel that it is placed in. It's an adaptable element, versus fire is just like, I'm here, I'm shining, I'm bright, I might burn you, but I am my own thing. And so finding that, I think, through your moon and your Mars is one of the bigger challenges, instead of defaulting into that kind of overly empathetic or influenceable space.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it possible, because I'm on the cusp, for me to be like back and forth between feeling Cancer-ish and Leo-ish, because that's...
Yeah, all the time. And this is, in the astrological community, there's great debate about cusps and whether or not they are quote unquote real. And I've done enough readings up to this point where clients on cusp signs find it valuable to think of themselves as teetering. You know, one day you're on one side of the fence and one day you're on the other side of the fence. And part of your journey this go around is learning to balance that dynamic. And understanding that even if we were to call you a Leo, because you certainly have the fire for it with your Mars and your moon, you still have the Lord of your chart in Cancer. So there's still that primary Cancer placement that's in your chart to kind of keep you grounded in that sign. But understanding how to straddle that fire-water dynamic is super important for your experience this go around.
That's interesting. I've always felt more like I was a Cancer, but I always feel like I've always try to be more like I have that Leo in me almost, like inside I have it in me. I just feel like it's a struggle to project it out, even though I want to, if that makes sense.
Yep, I understand. And that's a really great understanding of the process. Like, as an example, even the sun in Cancer, you know, is right on the edge of coming home to its home sign of Leo. It's right about to walk in the door. You know, it wants so bad to reach that first degree of Leo and just be like out of the water and kind of over the horizon and shining at its fullness. So it can create this almost kind of restless identity concept for sure.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and talk about the North Node. So one of the major topics in astrology that a lot of people like to discuss is the idea of life purpose. And here we find the North Node to be one of the most beneficial places to look at for understanding that experience. Your North Node is in Capricorn in the 5th house of children, parents, sexuality, and creativity. When we think of creativity and sexuality, it's the act of physical and metaphysical creation, which results in children, but also ties in the parental aspect, both your parents and your lineage, in regards to becoming a parent of someone who has parented you, but then also stepping up and understanding kind of who you are as an influencer for your children.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't necessarily need to relate to your own children, but often when we find the North Node in the 5th house, there is a need to incorporate creative endeavors. There is a need to incorporate and work with children in some way, shape, or form, and also to understand the role of the parent, to step up and be seen as an authority figure in someone's life, to forge someone, whether that's through mentorship, or through raising an actual child. Or I've had some clients that say, you know, I absolutely hate children. I never want to have children. Children are the bane of my existence. But every painting I create or every project that I work on, I consider my baby, my child. I'm like, that counts. You know, it's all part of that house. So that's the trajectory of the life. And I think that that's a really fun thing to talk about next. So how have you harnessed your creative endeavors, worked with children, or any of those topics?
So I do not have any biological children. I do have stepchildren, but I have been a nanny for 25 years. I have raised many, I have helped raise many kids that I started raising. They're in their 30s and have their own kids. So I've always raised, that has always been the thing that I've done just naturally. It is something that I'm trying to create my own thing now in my own, just my own baby, I guess you could say. And that is definitely something that I'm working on now. Like literally as we're talking, that's what I think about. What can I do to help create my own thing and my own path? Because I've always been the parent to someone else's kids. And I just feel like it's time for me to do my own thing.
Yeah. And I love nannying as a primary occupation for you because it does go along so well with that sun in Cancer in the 11th, and being the community mother, you know, such a vital role, such an important role you know, especially when other parents are unable to give love or attention, you know, you stepping in and fulfilling that societal obligation, you know, that everyone needs, and thinking about what those children would be like if they didn't have someone else to intervene on their parents' behalf, how they would have turned out differently. I think it's such a noble art, really, and it fits your chart so well.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So the ruler of your North Node in Capricorn is Saturn in Gemini in the 10th. And I think one of the things that you'll find interesting is when we find the ruler of a particular planet, or in this case, the calculated point of the North Node, it often indicates what the end result is or what the influencing factor will be of that aspect. And having the ruler of your North Node in the 10th, which is the house of success, the house of fame, is you will be famous for the aspect of children and child rearing, and known for that, known for your approach, known for the influence that you've had on people. But also when we see the ruler of the 5th in the 10th, this is going to be a key indicator that the children will surpass the parents in fame, fortune, and stature. And it's actually a very auspicious, it's kind of the placement that every parent wants in their chart, like, you know, to make sure that energetically and that they've signed up for karmically, that their children will go on to be bigger, better, and greater than they were. And you've got that marker in your chart. So I think that that's a really great understanding of like the impact that you have in that sphere of life, in that sphere of the world, and being well known for that down the road, like leaving a legacy of creating those childhood impressions.
Oh, thank you. That's actually really nice. That's very touching.
Yeah. And respecting that is super important. So in terms of creating your own, you know, whether it's creating a child or creating a product or creating a business or however you would like to kind of pursue that, I think steering too far away from the realm of children might actually bite you in the butt a little bit. You have in your chart a really great dynamic where Mars in Aries is ruling the 3rd of writing, teaching, and speaking, where you would do well to write a children's book or a guide of some kind for parents. There are several aspects in your chart and with your life experience included, you know, that you can approach the field and the experiences that you've had and turn them into a transformational tool or make them a business instead of an occupation, right? The idea that you're not necessarily doing the hands-on work, but you're teaching other people how to do that hands-on work, and you're kind of sparking the fire in other people that have that similar intention for the profession.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of your thoughts in terms of moving forward or your goals for the future, or what you're looking to kind of cultivate or develop?
So like I said, I do readings. I'm really interested in health and wellness as well. And I haven't really honestly thought about teaching parents or other nannies or anything. I guess I did think about it for a little while, but it's not that something I've really considered. So it's definitely something I'll think about. Only because I feel like I've just done it for so long that I'm feeling a little burnt out.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I've just raised so many people's other people's children and done that. It's just time for me to, even though that's what I'm good at, I just really want to do something different.
Right, exactly.
And I do love health and wellness. I love readings and doing that for people, and just I feel like I reflect that person's energy back to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love. And those, as of right now, are things that I would love to create into some business, but I'm not quite sure how to do that yet.
Yeah. One of the interesting parts about having that moon in Aries, Mars in Aries, is there is this energy of just doing and therapeutically failing until you get it right. And if you have an idea, just going for it. Initiating first, asking questions later, and then through your trials and errors, arriving at the right place. You know, Mars, what stifles that Mars, which is ruling your 8th house of entrepreneurship and kind of making yourself, like that self-made tendency, is inaction. You know, so thinking about it too much, which again, that Mercury being compromised, ruling the mind in the 11th, you know, what should I do? How should I do it? How does this fit into the greater aspect of society? Screw it. Just really go forward and do the thing. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and you pivot well and you just keep that fire rolling. But inaction is probably going to be the biggest weakness of your chart. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. I just have great ideas and I start to do them and then I stop. And then there you are.
Well, and one of the things that Mars really needs to do is keep momentum. So if you have a project that you start and for some reason it fizzles, that could be your chart telling you that you've gone too far in this area. You've gone too far out of the parameters, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need you to pivot back and start something else that's a little bit more in line with who you are. So I wouldn't consider that like sometimes clients can say, oh, well, I feel so flighty when I start all of these things and I never finish any of them. And Mars would argue that it's because they're not appropriate. And we just need to kind of keep bulling forward and really making sure that start again, spark it back up. If the fire goes out, we have to dry out the wood and do it again, you know, scrap the idea and refine it, you know, and just keep moving forward. And if mistakes are made, let the mistakes be made and let those add to the experience instead of feeling shame or like you're taking away from, you know, your life's purpose. You know, working through that experience and working through just the constant need to move and do and be and have, expressing yourself through those entrepreneurial tendencies is just part of your chart. And although Mars isn't necessarily great with follow through, you know, it is great with starting. And sometimes you just need to start over again to get that fire back.
Okay. That's very helpful. I mean, I'm incredibly persistent. I never give up, but then I give up. Yeah. And then I get back up again and I do it again and I don't give up, but then I give up. It's not even giving up. I just completely stop. I become like, I also am interested, if I can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I have always had issues with speaking, like always just speaking to people when I get like anxiety or just when I'm socially nervous in some way, I like completely don't know how to talk. It's literally done. So I'm curious if that is in my chart somewhere, or what, anything that you can speak to that, because it has always been a very huge issue for me my entire life since I was born.
That would be the compromised Mercury. You know, having the Lord of your chart as Mercury would normally give you a silver tongue, would really give you the ability to speak clearly, would really kind of imbue you with the qualities of that kind of linguist. But because Mercury is so kind of debilitated, that's where the mind just can't form the right words and it just comes out as this sloppy mess. So there are a couple things that we can do to remediate that. And this is where I think astrology really shines, because if we understand the planets well enough, we can understand how to reactivate or to nourish or feed the different parts of the chart that are weaker. And for you, feeding Mercury might look like, if you're having an important conversation, script it out ahead of time. Literally write down what you want to say, write down the responses of the people in the conversation so that you can filter through those ahead of time and really like create the script, make the scenario before it happens. Likewise, you should always have some sort of spell check or somebody kind of looking over your emails before you send them, but understanding that conversations for you need a little bit more time to stew. As an example, if somebody wants to have a conversation and you feel yourself tripping over your words, you can always say, you know, I understand that this conversation is important and I would like to have it. I'm just not prepared for it at this time. And then you can go back, gather your points, gather your thoughts, script it out, and really make sure that the conversation has enough bite to it, and that you understand your talking points, that you understand what you want to say, and you're not having to come up with it on the spot. Because when we're activating that Mercury, it's so prone to the energy of the other person and their expectations and your response to their expectations, and all of a sudden you start to drown in the emotional overwhelm of the Cancer, right? So we really want to take Mercury out of the equation, shake it off, dry it, and make sure that the words are solid and concrete before we have those important conversations, and make sure that you have the boundaries in place communication wise to pivot the conversation in a direction that makes you feel safe and comfortable, even if that means saying, can we have this discussion at a later time?
Okay.
Another thing that we can do from a metaphysical perspective is work with Mercury spiritually. And if you would like, especially around times that you are having a really important meeting or a really important conversation, or you're going to a party, or you know that you're going to need to do a lot of speaking or socializing, it would be appropriate for you to set up a Mercury altar in your home, in your space, and make offerings of smoke and coffee to Mercury on Wednesdays, Mercury's day. And just kind of have that little spiritual support of saying, I understand that we don't have the best relationship. I understand that when I was born, you were having a bad day. And so you didn't give me, some of the gifts that I need to thrive, but I would really like to try to repair that relationship with you. Could you send me some extra good communication juju on during today's event or during the conversation that I would like to have? But engaging Mercury through written and verbal mediums ahead of time and working with Mercury spiritually are some of the ways that we would remediate that placement.
Okay, so it's not something that like you can change really because it's there, but you can sort of move it a little, like repair it or something.
Right. So in astrology, the natal chart does not change unless you're looking at another technique called progressions. However, the idea is that you have octaves of experience. If you choose to do the internal work to say, I recognize that this is my weakest planet, so I need to take communication or public speaking classes, work on this area, like I said, simple things like constantly making sure that somebody double checks your own emails, or that you have some sort of spell check, or that you script your conversations ahead of time, taking those little extra steps to ensure that communication goes smoothly because it's a weak point in the chart, is how we use astrology to leverage the life in a more full way, instead of just saying, oh, I'm just a poor communicator, you're going to have to deal with it. That's shucking your responsibility, and not necessarily growing into your natal placements.
Okay, so nothing is really 100% set in stone.
Right. Astrology is great because it gives us a framework, it gives us a blueprint, but you can always redo the room. You can always have a remodel. It's going to take work. It might take money. It might take time, but you can rebuild the relationship with the weak parts of yourself. And astrology is a great feedback tool to do that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I actually didn't really know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a lot of astrologers can somewhat be deterministic, but when we look at more evolutionary or modern forms of astrology, we're looking at the dialogue that we have with the stars and with the natal chart as a two-way conversation. If you sweep everything under the rug and you just let things stay there and fester and rot, and you're just not going to do the work, then the planets aren't gonna assist you anyway. But if you take the steps to actually formulate the relationships, repair the understanding of these archetypes, and work with these energetic forces, because they are just like you and I, they are people, they are personalities, they are aspects of ourselves that can be exercised and strengthened. That's taking ownership of your natal chart.
Okay. That's really interesting. So I have one more question, if I may.
Yeah.
I have always had like a I don't know, interesting relationship with money. I always have been really good at making money, but really good at spending money, and really good at being in debt, and really good at getting out of, like, it's always been these extremes. And I'm curious if that is in my charts at all, and if there's something that I can do to strengthen that so I can cultivate the better relationship part instead of the debt and spending part.
Yeah. So when we look at the second house of finance, we have two of the outer planets here, and the outer planets are slow. Everybody in your generation has these planets in these signs, so it's not necessarily as unique to you. But putting Uranus, the planet of upheaval and dramatic change and natural disasters, in the second house of finance is not what we like to see. And so this is the roller coaster kind of that you've chosen to have financially. Also, the ruler of your second house of finance is Venus in the 12th. The 12th house is kind of the house of the underworld. It's where we go to cook physically and metaphysically. It's the house of jails and hospitalizations and hidden enemies. It's a very kind of karmic healing house where we have to learn about our responsibilities to ourselves and others in terms of progress. But it's also a house of kind of great darkness and blindness. It's where we can't really see a lot of our strength. And having your Venus there ruling your second house of finance kind of puts your finances in the underworld as this kind of blind spot, right? So when we look at the second house of finance and we compare it to your Mars and your Moon in Aries in the 8th, what I really want to make you aware of is that the 8th house is also the house of investment. It's also the house of taxes, right? So working with a qualified CPA is probably going to be my biggest suggestion. Somebody who is a neutral third party who can advise you on how your budget should work, where your finances need to be taxed and spent accordingly, so that you have somebody else's framework around you teaching you about the boundaries of financial wellness. Yeah. And that's something that you can not only relate to, but learn from as well. Because if you're going to be a business owner, you need to not only have a handle over your own finances, but understand money in general. And working with a financial professional is not just going to be a good move for you personally, it's also going to be a good move for you professionally, so that you understand what you need to save, how you need to save it, or budget accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this is, also because Venus is in the 12th, understanding your metaphysical relationship to money. That's always a really important discussion as well. Do you deserve money? What is the purpose of wealth? Having that underworld vibe attached to your bank account can provide some really powerful understandings of money. Money is just another form of energy. It's another form of attention and power. And it's a tool to be utilized. But if you don't pick up that tool, if you don't learn how to wield it, then when you need it in a pinch, you're going to cut yourself. And that's kind of the longer term struggle of the financial aspect. Something that we see a lot wherever Pluto is placed is there's often a 50-year plan. And halfway through the life, we start to unlock the real lessons of, in your case, value, wealth, resources, understanding personal wealth, but also kind of the accumulation of money as an asset, not something to be worried about, but something to plan for, something to help strengthen your understanding of your worth, your value, your time, and fuel your personal progress through your life.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, astrology isn't always about spiritual reparations. It's always about, what is most practical. And sometimes what is most practical is seeking out a CPA.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Any kind of final questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up?
No, that is it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to take the time to kind of talk with us. And thank you for being the inaugural chart that we kind of look at. And hopefully everybody watching enjoyed. And if you did, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and we will continue with this series going forward, exposing you to the ins and outs of astrology.